Everyone. Now today I want to begin a short series of messages on perhaps the number one topic on people's lips when it comes to the question of the existence of God. And that is the question as to why God allows suffering. And so I'm going to look at the whole issue of suffering. Today's title is simply called Suffering. Now, to quote John MacArthur, one of the most persistent arguments against the existence of God is based on the existence of physical, for example, catastrophes, illness, pain, death, and moral evil, sin, in the world. The question is, if God is real, perfectly good and omnipotent, how can evil exist? If God were all good and all powerful, he would desire and be able to prevent evil, but there is evil, therefore there is no all powerful, all good God. So that's the persistent argument against the existence of God. That's how the argument goes. And yet, during the course of these sermons, I will argue, and not only argue, but will demonstrate that it is only through having a Christian worldview that suffering and the reasons for suffering can be fully understood. As Timothy Keller states, and I'll be using a lot of his material during the messages, suffering, whilst it may be the main reason why so many people resist and reject God, there are just as many people, he says, who find God through affliction and suffering. They find that adversity moves them toward God rather than away from God. And that those who are already believers are pulled often into a deeper experience of God's reality, love, and grace. As one man who was going through a major crisis said, he said, I always knew in principle that Jesus is all you need. I always knew in principle that Jesus is all you need to get through. But you don't really know Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all that you have. Now, suffering is defined in my old 1950s dictionary, and I like to use my old 1950s dictionary because these days they're always changing the meaning of words. So it's defined in my old dictionary. Suffering is to endure, to undergo, to bear, to undergo pain, punishment, mental distress, to sustain a loss. I'll say that again. It's to endure, to undergo, to bear, to undergo pain, punishment, mental distress, to sustain a loss. Now, everyone suffers. Everyone suffers. You see, suffering is no respecter of persons. To quote Timothy Keller, the loss of loved ones, debilitating and fatal illnesses, personal betrayals, financial reversals, moral failures, all of these will eventually come upon you if you live out a normal lifespan. No one is immune. Therefore, no matter what precautions we take, no matter how well we've put together a good life, no matter how hard we've worked to be healthy, wealthy, comfortable with friends and family, and successful with our career, something will inevitably ruin it. No amount of money, power, and planning can prevent bereavement, dire illness, relationship betrayal, financial disaster, or a host of other troubles from entering your life. See, all of us know what it is to experience suffering. In reflecting on my own life, I think back to the early death of April's father and how much she suffered as a result of that. I think of my dad got into hospital to replace a heart valve, and when they opened him up, they phoned us up and told us there was a very good chance that he won't live. It's a lot worse than we thought. He didn't die at that time at all. A number of years later, of his death, I think of that and how the family suffered as a result of that, particularly my mum. I think of my mother's death and the suffering that caused, especially to my sister, who was very close to her mother. And of course the serious accident that Jodie and Jamie were involved in, where for Jodie it was very much life or death whether she would survive. Think of that. So all of us experience suffering. The Bible tells us in Job chapter 5 and verse 7 that man is born to trouble, as surely as sparks fly upward. And Matthew 5:45 says that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun, S-U-N, his sun, to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. You see, good and bad happen to us all. They happen to us all, regardless of our age or status, or whether we're rich or poor, whether we're good or whether we're bad. Good and bad happen to us all. You know, that's unlike those who believe in karma. Unlike those, as Christians, we see that suffering is often unjust and unfair, or at least that's the way it appears to be when we look at it as Christians. We can see that. People who live well often do not do well. The Bible says in Psalm 90 and verse 10, the length of our days is 70 years, or 80 if we have the strength. Yet their span is but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. Life is short, and then we're gone. But whilst we're here, it will be but trouble and sorrow, the Bible tells us. You know, those preachers that declare that if you just come to Jesus, or your problems will be over, you're just going to prosper, you just need to believe. You know, these preachers, they're very much misleading people. You just need to believe. Just come to Jesus and all your troubles will be over. No, they won't. You know, life will not be easy. The Bible tells us that. Whether you're a Christian or whether you're not a Christian, life will not be easy. All of us will experience suffering. You know, suffering is everywhere. At times, suffering can be completely overwhelming. Even just looking back very briefly into history. In the 14th century, you had the Black Death.